Hello, hello. Welcome to our webinar. I am just going to let a few more people in and start to share our presentation. And then probably when we've gotten onto the minute, then I will introduce our speakers and go into the webinar itself. Just while we're coming into the webinar, I should just point a couple of things out that are unsurprising. We are recording this, so if you want to choose between listening to the webinar or writing everything down, you can listen to the webinar. We'll have a recording. We'll share the recording with people who've attended and also with people who've registered and have not been able to attend. The other thing I'll point out is that there is a Q&A panel at the bottom of the screen. So during the event, feel free to contribute, type in your questions. We will work our way through them and address them. And then we'll also send out a feedback form. So that's my kind of housekeeping while people have filtered in. What I want to do now is move into the webinar. We've got a little bit of content to share with you. I should also say we'll be able to share copies of the slides with you as well. Okay, other housekeeping points. Attendees are muted. Yes, we can't hear you. If you unmute yourself and speak, unless you're a panelist, like Richard and Florie, then we won't hear you. The Q&A, I will probably pick up on Q&A at the end of the presentation, but I will be keeping an eye out. So if I see something that fits particularly well, then maybe I might throw that question in. But generally, I will take questions through the Q&A function. And just to introduce our speakers, Richard is somebody who is, very well known as an industry analyst, very well known in the cybersecurity market because of your yearbook and your online database profiling the industry, but also very well known in the analyst relations world as the author of the best-selling book on analyst relations. So a really somebody with a unique 3D perspective on this conversation. And my colleague Florie Lhuillier is here with us as well. Florie's been running cybersecurity public relations work for CCgroup clients for several years, certainly for all the 5 years that I've been here at the company, has led the very rapid growth of our cybersecurity practice in a market which is, I think, the most challenging market for cybersecurity for vendors to operate in. So dynamic. It's an incredible accomplishment to be able to win attention in this market. I and Duncan Chapple, I think a few people here know me. I'm a former analyst myself, and I lead up the analyst relations programs here at CCgroup in our analyst relations practice. What I'm going to do first is hand over to Richard, and just to give some context, we're talking today about some research that Florie and the cybersecurity stream that she leads has commissioned. This is not the first time that they've conducted this research. So, tech purchasing is particularly complex in the cybersecurity market, and I thought we'd invite Richard to start off the conversation just by giving some of that context for today's discussion.
So wonderful.
Thank
so
you.
I just start?
Please, just start.
Yeah, so a couple of things obviously have happened. The pandemic was rather disruptive to how industry as a whole worked. And of course, we had the initial phase, some vendors who were ready for it, providing, cloud-based proxies, called it March Madness after the college basketball tournament held here in the US. Just because some of those vendors that were doing VPN stuff, had their client base double in a month, 30 days. I talked to a local mortgage brokerage company here in Detroit, and as soon as they sent everybody home, first week of March, they had to equip everybody with equipment and for remote meetings and stuff. So they got basically desktop PCs, webcams, audio equipment, everything everybody needed, pulled it into on huge trucks into the parking lot, and on their way home, everybody was getting all their equipment, and it was an amazing transition. And I think overall, a good thing for security and for the world in general. It's changing our lifestyles, but it also changed the perspective on buying, and in particular on security buying. On the one hand, there was sectors like the VPN world that just excelled at that, but on the other hand, there was exposure now because a lot of companies just turned on remote access directly to your desktop at work, and that immediately began being used by ransomware gangs to infect companies. So we had that turmoil going on, but also there was no more, hey, sales guy flies into town, meets all the prospects for lunch, dinner, in your boardrooms. That just stopped cold, right? That for over a year and a half, none of that was happening. All the big events were canceled. You couldn't reach people. So we've gone through an adjustment period, right? And things are settling in now with webinars. Hey, everybody, welcome to our webinar. And basically there's the travel budgets, were almost non-existent now for a lot of people in the sales world. Thankfully, conferences are coming back and everybody's going to them, and actually pretty dramatic amounts. But in the meantime, we've got the political economy, multiple wars around the world, particularly Ukraine and Israel. And of course, Israel is home to 300 cybersecurity vendors, and they are, struggling with additional stress in their daily life. I had a webinar going on with one, and they had to delay by 10 minutes because the air raid sirens were going off and they had to seek shelter immediately. And I deal with security vendors in Ukraine. And I try and ship them my books, and I just can't get a single thing through because FedEx and USPS and UPS have all stopped sending to Ukraine, and yet their business just continues right along as is. So I guess challenging times, like everything. Every time there's a disruption to either the political, the global economy, or dramatic things like a pandemic or volcano in Iceland, things like that. Business goes on, and we find a way around the difficulties.
And Richard, it's obviously even harder for people in the cybersecurity business because all of these trends become even more problematic because of the particular context that cybersecurity vendors are in.
Yeah, and a cybersecurity. Any of these events leads to more cybersecurity attacks, right? So an economic downturn leads to phishing scams about your compensation as we let you go from your job, changes to all these phishing events built around the current crisis. Always going to happen. And just think of it, the cybercrime gangs responsible for all of this have to make money too. And if the economy is down or inflation is up, etc., they have to make more money, just like everybody else. They have to grow. So they increase their activities and work harder, making our job more difficult, but increasing opportunities for cybersecurity companies. So it's kind of the one of the parts here about why security is incredibly challenging. There's a few things, right? So first of all, security is not it's not a vertical, right? It's not financial software. And Ross Lhuillier makes this point in a recent blog post. And it's completely horizontal across every aspect of anybody who uses technology. Every time there's a dramatic shift in technology, thinking back to starting in 2008 with the advent of the cloud and AWS introducing cloud computing, to today when everybody, all the forward-facing organizations have moved to the cloud. Everybody else will move to the cloud and are thinking about moving to the cloud, but that has increased the attack surface dramatically. And of course, IoT, as you deploy smart devices in your operations, for your building control systems, et cetera, that increases your attack surface. And of course, my particular area of study is the provider landscape, which makes it difficult for end users to find the proper solution for their needs, and extremely difficult for the cybersecurity vendor to be heard above the noise, constantly looking for new ways. Seems like the best way to get noticed is to take in a giant seed round or A round, which is pretty expensive, right? You give up a huge chunk of your company to get that attention, but you practically need it because you have to participate in large analyst events, which are extremely expensive. You have to have a constant presence at all the major conferences. And talking about growth, there's more major conferences every single day. I'm going deeper and deeper into the conference world to attempt to find regional players all around the world, and I just find hundreds of conferences at which startups are presenting. So today there are 3,644 cybersecurity vendors, and I've got a backlog of several hundred that I still have to add. The hard part, of course, is categorizing them. And of course, there are new ones being developed every day. It takes about 2 years for somebody to go from idea to coming out of stealth. So you can be sure 2 years from now, by 2025, there'll be 200 or 300 vendors that got started in 2023, even though it was a downturn.
That is quite a phenomenal layer of complexity, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Florie, with this context, can I invite you to say something about the study that you've commissioned? As I mentioned earlier on, this is not the first time you've done this study, so I know that the methods are extremely strong. You've got a slide here about the methodology. Can you just give a little bit of context into what the study is and why you commissioned it?
Yeah, of course. So I think we decided to do this research for 2 reasons. The first one, like Richard said, cybersecurity vendors today are selling solutions in a very challenging market environment. So what we wanted to do with this research is explore basically the impact that the current economic climate, but also the industry skills gap, right, which is another, I think, challenge that the industry is facing right now, has basically on the cybersecurity buying landscape, and what today influences enterprises' choice of provider. And that was the first reason why we wanted to do that research. The second is that at CCgroup, we have an in-depth focus on different areas of technology, like cybersecurity, like you mentioned, Duncan, and we like to practice what we preach. We really believe in research, and we want to do this research because that allows us to be informed about how our clients' buying audiences actually behave. That way, by really getting to know how our clients' customers make their buying decisions, we're able to obviously advise them on the sort of best marketing strategies and campaigns that's going to influence buyer awareness and purchasing decisions, including analyst relations program. So these were really the 2 reasons why we decided to do this research. So in terms of the methodology, so this time around, so we commissioned the research through Goldman Parks research, and we decided to interview 360 cybersecurity decision makers in companies with more than 100 employees, so across the UK and the US. So it was an even split, 180 respondents in each country. And if we could look at the verticals as well that we've surveyed. So we looked at retail, healthcare, financial services, and sort of technology, media, and telecoms industries. And all the companies that we surveyed, they had been involved in a major security tech purchase in the last 12 months. And actually, if we sort of dig deeper into the size of company we surveyed, the average employee count was, nearly 5,000. So we're really looking at sort of large enterprises there.
Fascinating. Thank you.
I guess the first thing to talk about is, the buyer journey, right? That's the thing that we've been sort of looking at throughout this research. And I think one of the ways, obviously, to influence, your prospective buyers is through analyst relations. So if you consider the different stages of a buying process in terms of awareness, selection, and finally the decision itself, we found that analyst influence is actually significant throughout the whole process. It starts by analysts, being the number one channel for driving awareness of vendors through to their reports, basically being the most useful content at a decision stage. So that was really interesting to see like that sort of importance throughout the whole journey, the whole buying process. And if you actually look at these three different sort of stages in detail. So the next one is obviously, the first one is awareness. So if you don't mind, Duncan, moving slides. So yeah, if you look at awareness to start with, so we asked respondents, how much influence different channels have on their awareness of a cybersecurity vendor. And as you can see, industry analyst is actually the most influential one overall, followed by broader business events and the media. And if we look at it from a regional perspective, analysts come actually first in the US, 78%, and second in the UK at 69%. So pretty significant. And then if you look at it from a sort of sector breakdown, industry analysts play also a pivotal role in informing decision-making, particularly in the telecom sector and also financial services. So yes, that was really interesting to see like the importance that industry analysts have, sort of from the get-go. Now, there's another, obviously, side to this. So we've been looking at the channels, but it was not only just about the channels. We've also been asking respondents about the types of content that resonates with them. So on the next slide, we can see some of the findings. So according to the respondents, industry analyst reports have a significant power to spread brand awareness amongst cybersecurity buyers, alongside social media content, which actually was interesting to see, events and webinar. And if you look at the findings from a sector's perspective, industry analyst reports are more important for buyers within the retail and telecom sectors. So you see it's already shifting. Channels, most important for telecoms and financial services, content more important for retail and telecoms, or TMT. So that means that cybersecurity vendors really need to make sure that they are being perceived, in the correct way by industry analysts, and invest in analyst relations to make sure that these relationships are being looked after. And not just necessarily think about one channel, but always think about, several channels at the same time alongside analyst relations. Now, if you look at the second stage of the buyer journey, so the selection stage, so we've asked buyers what percentage of cybersecurity tech purchases involved analysts in some way. And it turns out actually the majority of them, so 61% overall, do involve industry analysts. And that number is actually even higher in the US, right, at 65%. So again, interesting to see how influential they are here at the selection stage. On the next slide, we also look at the channels. So regarding the channels that buyers found most influential when narrowing down the list of prospective cybersecurity vendors to engage with, again, industry analysts play an important role. They are in the top 3 alongside industry-specific events and business tech media. And actually, if we look at it from a sector perspective, they top the chart for retail businesses. So if you are looking to target retailers, for example, you really need to make sure that analysts are talking to them about you. Again, from selection stage point of view, we've also looked at content. So when it comes to influencing cybersecurity buyers at the selection stage, analyst reports are in the top after blogs and before case studies. So really both case studies and industry analyst reports provide a deep level of detail that is going to help buyers, I think, during the selection process. So analyst reports notably provide insight into the most sort of intangible qualities, right, that affect the selection process, such as the vendors like reputation, flexibility, ability to set and or align with wider industry trends. And obviously in the case study side, you also have the proof points. So interesting to see those two, I think, side by side. And now the final stage of the buyer journey. So what's going to be driving the final selections? And so we asked respondents which content types and resources they found most useful in order to finally select the vendor. And yet, interestingly, industry analyst reports are the only information channel named by more than 50% of buyers as an influence at the final stage. So as we sort of look at the different stages, it all more grows in significance, throughout the journey. So if you look actually, the summary, because I'm conscious I've been throwing a lot of different stats at you. So to summarize, really, here's why analyst relations is really stealing the show and is a tactic I think you should be thinking about, and dedicate time and investment into. Is first, industry analysts are the most influential channel amongst the UK and US businesses and, specifically large enterprises for driving awareness of a cybersecurity technology supplier. They're also the biggest influence on cybersecurity buyers at the selection stage, with 61% of buyers using analysts when it comes to the end of the buying cycle. Analyst reports are also considered the second most influential content type for driving the selection of a vendor. And then finally, analyst reports are the only information source that affects most buyers at the sort of selection stage, final decision stage. So really our advice here is that as a vendor, you really need to optimize your analyst relations and make sure it is strategically being integrated into all of your marketing and comms programs. So yeah, I think these were basically a sort of overall view of some of the key findings from our research around analyst relations. And you can obviously download the reports if you go on our website. So yeah, CCgroup.pr.com. And then if you look at the section Insights, you're going to be finding our report there. But obviously, feel free to reach out to us directly if you want a copy.
And what might interest participants in this webinar is that actually there are two reports out from this study. Yeah. There's one report on cybersecurity and marketing, and the other on cybersecurity and analyst relations, which gives some rather different perspectives. I'm going to go on back to Richard. I just want to say again that there is space for Q&A. I've been glancing at some of the questions in the Q&A. Most of them, I think, seem better to come back at the end. But what I encourage my fellow panelists to do is to peek at the questions and think about what answers they might want to give to these questions as they get closer. Richard, you've heard this. You've heard these data now. Obviously, you've got to look at them beforehand as well. So I'm not putting you on the spot, but I know you have some thoughts about what these data mean, what the significance of these data are. So I wonder if I can invite you to talk to that.
Yeah, and even as Florie went through them again, I was struck by something that just I wouldn't have expected. As much as I want to see analysts have an important role, I always assumed that the peer-to-peer things were much more influential for product awareness, product selection, and final decision. Just, over and over, when I do talk to CISOs, or I'm present at their meetings, they are constantly asking each other what should they use for X, Y, or Z, and then pretty much somebody says, "Oh, use whatever Proofpoint for email security." They go off and do it. It's like I don't know if they even go through an RFP process. So it surprises me that analysts are at above the peer-to-peer stuff in every column that you showed for each of the verticals, which is heartening, right? It's like the peer-to-peer means that that marketing is causing it, right? Because peer-to-peer means that you're getting one one buyer through your marketing efforts and sales efforts, and then that person tells everybody else that they like your product. I mean, that part is great, but not the part where the winners are not necessarily the best products, right? An analyst wants to see the best products win in the marketplace. So it's going to change my perspective on advice I give people. I mean, certainly to the CISOs I hear complaining that the market is too complicated, there's too many vendors, there's no way to sort through them all. I slap my head when I hear that, right? That is what the analyst industry was created to do, is to answer your questions about a complicated market. They're dedicated people. There are over 100 analysts at Gartner, 28 at Forrester. I think Omdia is up to 15. All of these analysts are full-time, just looking at the security market, just talking to the vendors, just thinking about it, just trying to figure out where it's going. You have to talk to them the CISOs have to be talking to them and not relying on the peer-to-peer, or else you're just going to get the same old, right? That's how we got to where, McAfee was the leading enterprise endpoint solution, right? We got just an awful product distributed and owned by everybody, and that led to the creation of dozens of more companies to fill in after McAfee kind of dissolved. So I guess that's my initial thoughts. Thanks for that data, Florie. And go ahead. You were going to say something?
No, no problem.
All right, very good.
Actually, Richard, I mean, just to jump in on that thought myself, I'm reminded today I got a newsletter today from one of the big four management consulting companies, and it had an article in about consolidation in the market for self-support software. Yeah. And I found this really interesting. Like, this must be like a 25-year-old market, right? And now we've got like consolidation. I mean, okay, markets are always consolidating all the time, aren't they? But to reach that point where actually the number of participants in the market starts to decline, this is very late. So complexity is built into some markets. But exactly.
We're not there. There is no consolidation in cybersecurity. And as I just hammering home in all my books, my writing, it's, if you're in, I live in Detroit, and of course, Detroit had at one point, about 1909, at 100 different car manufacturers, brand names with logos, built the chassis, bought the engines or built the engines, put them all together and sold them in dealerships. Obviously, we had consolidation in that industry. Hotels here in the US, there used to be multiple brands. Now there's two. That's consolidation. Airlines, that's consolidation, because they don't have, all they have as a driver is the customer demands for, better things, faster in the case of technology, faster and lower cost and easier to buy and better support. In security, you've got all those demands, of course, but you also have the threat actors who are changing the environment all the time. Lately it's been API security, right? As the industry switched to API, the bad guys discover how powerful APIs are, and start hacking them. So now there's 42 API security solutions out there. It just goes on and on and on like that. So there won't be any consolidation, with the caveat, even though I've been saying there's no consolidation for 25 years, the endpoint security space did consolidate by dramatically. Over 100 vendors are gone. And that, the reason for that was the products didn't work anymore. And Microsoft came in with a product that also didn't work very well, but was free. So why in the world, if you can actually get it together to cancel your subscription to, Norton or whatever you're using, then their sales are going to drop off. So of course they combined and consolidated into one company. I think it's called Gem now, but it was Norton, LifeLock, and it included AVG and Avast, etc. So yeah, endpoint protection, antivirus stuff consolidated, and that will happen to other spaces, right? Probably going to start happening to the hardware appliance firewall business as we rely less and less on them and more on the so-called SASE solutions. So thanks for pushing my hot button there, Duncan.
Totally. And just to flip onto the topic for this slide that's up here.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose one of the things that will be on the mind of people who are here trying to understand how cybersecurity solution providers can benefit from this analyst influence. I mean, one thing that's quite striking was it 3,700 vendors you said earlier on?
Yeah, 3,644.
Yeah,
and
so
to answer the question that came in, there's 200 or 300 created every year. What happens, of course, there's last year and the year before, there were 350 acquisitions. So those are potentially vendors that will fall out of the market. About half of them stick around as standalone because they're acquired by private equity or somebody. And then you've got the startups, and then we also have several hundred failures. And yet that total goes up every year. So it's a pretty phenomenal pattern.
Totally. And in terms of like the influence that these vendors can have on analysts, I mean, I really wonder how you may have a gut feel of how many of those, almost 4,000 vendors are in touch with analysts. But how far do you think that cybersecurity firms are effectively influencing analysts, or do you think that they're more influenced by analysts than are influencing it?
It is a two-way street. I think analysts are heavily influenced by the vendors. The wise analysts who've been around for a while realize that they don't know everything. They know that somebody, any vendor that has created a product, selling it, and getting renewals, knows something about the market that the analyst doesn't, right? Because they talk to hundreds of their customers every year, whereas the analyst might only talk to a few of the customers of that particular vendor every year. So when they talk to the vendor, they listen very closely to what the vendor's telling them. That now they have to winnow out, filter out the stuff the vendor's telling them that is tainted by the vendor's perspective, or the vendor is lying to them. Right? That's the hard part about being an industry analyst, is all vendors lie all the time. And you just have to, it just takes time to figure out when they've lied, right? They can just tell you in the first call that they have X number of customers. But after that, PR firm's been fired and the new PR firm comes in, the new person doesn't remember the old lies and gives you a different number. So it's a, cat and mouse game, keeping track of your lies. I tell people, hey, if you're going to lie to an analyst, write it down and make sure, do a better job of analyst relations so that you can be consistent in your, let's not call them lies, let's call them your shading of the facts. So yes, vendors are extremely influential, because they're the ones actually creating the markets. The analysts are influential of vendors when they do consult directly with them. Typically, if you're a larger company and don't have a paid relationship with an analyst, they're not going to give you advice, right? That Gartner's constantly doing that. It's kind of their instructions. Smaller independent analysts, no problem. they'll give advice for free all the time, take it for what it costs, but it's still a two-way street for sure.
Totally. I know we've got a few more slides to get through, so let me just click through onto this. Obviously, one of the things that is that you mentioned is it's coming up for the 10th anniversary of your book.
Yep.
Up and to the right. On the blog post that you wrote announcing your intention to write the new edition, pretty much everything that you spoke about was about Gartner. You know, Gartner's growth and more complex ways of influencing Gartner. I see one of the questions is actually about the role of inquiry. You know, I wonder if inquiry is a more effective way of influencing Gartner than it used to be. But what are your thoughts about?
Yeah, first of all,
that decade?
You know, why focus on Gartner over all the rest? Because Gartner dominates, right? They're the largest by a factor of 5 over Forrester. Nobody ever, you know, in that selection phase that Florie was talking about, always when the final decision is being made, the CISO or CIO says, what does Gartner say? Right? I'm sorry, but no time does a CEO or CIO say, what does Forrester say? What does Omdia say? Now, mind you, if that's your only paid relationship, you'll turn to them first, no question. Usually the other analyst firms are used as, well, you know, Gartner doesn't say anything, but Forrester has us way up here in the wave. You know, so it's kind of a also ran kind of solution. So I'm sorry to say that I'm not a Gartner salesperson. And certainly, yes, I was a Gartner analyst. And I love to disagree with practically everything Gartner analysts say today, all the time. But their influence is unchallenged.
And actually, I wonder, Florie, I don't have the numbers in my head, and there's no reason why you would either. But I seem to think that in the study, you do. I mean, obviously, in the full report, I mean, there's a lot of information in the full report that isn't available here. But I seem to think that in the study, don't you ask people which analyst firms they're using, and obviously, you know, Gartner is one of the obviously, Gartner is the most famous analyst firm. Lots of people are using it, but isn't it the case that quite a lot of the people in the study seem to be using multiple analyst firms? I mean, nobody replicates Gartner's revenues, yeah, but it seemed to me that the buyers that you were surveying seem to be quite savvy people who are getting multiple opinions. Is that right? I mean, like,
yeah, no, absolutely. And actually, Gartner didn't come out on top. Gartner was second. I think Deloitte came first at 64% overall. Gartner was second at 57%. However, we can see that Gartner has maybe more influential in the US, for example, than in the UK. But yeah, if we look at, I think the findings, we can see there's, I would say on average, a company would be maybe speaking to like 4 or 5 different analyst firms. Yeah. So Deloitte, Gartner, Forrester, HFS, and Frost & Sullivan, I think, were the top 5.
Yeah.
So,
and that chart is in the report,
of interesting points, because of course, you wouldn't compare Gartner to Deloitte in the wider market, right? Because Deloitte is 700,000 employees, but Deloitte's cybersecurity revenue is $7 billion. They are bigger than Gartner in total. So no surprise that they're heavily influencing cybersecurity purchasing decisions.
Yeah. And I suppose one thing about this plurality of analysts, I mean, there are other things that have been changing in the AR world as well. And you've definitely spoken about other trends that make things different for analysts, different for buyers at the same time.
Yeah, since I launched a platform with all this data and all the vendors, I've been hearing from all the platform builders for purchasing. So there's, a very vibrant startup world in companies, entrepreneurs thinking, hey, it's a real pain to purchase a product. Let's help the decision process. Let's help with the RFP creation. Let's give you all the data. So they come to me for the data, but then they enhance it and package it and make the job easier. Now I know that the analyst firms will do product selection consulting as well, right? And some of them have products to help you do that. But I think that's kind of interesting. And there's certainly going to be some really good ones thanks to AI that come around that, you'll just give it your requirements. It'll come back and say, well, you should probably look at these 5, create the short lists. And I agree that what's changed is this rise of opinion leaders. And I think it's because of social media, obviously. So where some analysts and former analysts, the John Kindervarg, Jason Cunningham, have made a name for themselves through their video, their writing, the catching on of some of the things they started while they're at Forrester, and so people listen to them. So therefore, you should work with them to influence their buyers or their audience into looking at your product. So I see a lot of that going on. And this concept of B2B buying getting more B2C, and that is the SaaS world happening everywhere you look, where you can just, anybody in your organization who's doing something from the IT perspective can find a SaaS solution to do it and pay with a credit card, and they're off and running. And that's a great way to, for a B2B company to get their foot in the door at a company. So if somebody's, for their own personal website is using something to secure it, they might recommend it to the company they work at. So beautiful, beautiful channel.
And I wonder, like, where, sorry, a couple of people commented on the data that blogs were quite a high, format for consuming information. Obviously, many people blog, thought leaders blog, industry analysts blog, people who work for cybersecurity companies blog. But, is anyone surprised that blogs rank so high for content in the selection phase? Is there?
I was very surprised. It feels to me like nobody reads anymore at all. So I'm very, very surprised.
I was as well. But I wonder if, maybe when we said blogs, some other respondents were thinking about, I don't know, LinkedIn post, like the LinkedIn polls, like the blogs that you see on LinkedIn, because I think lots more people might be scrolling down, LinkedIn in the morning and sort of reading the blogs on that platform, as opposed to actually going on a vendor's website and reading their blogs, So I think it might be the reason why I think blogs, are at the top.
And I guess it includes video blogs.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, let's move along. I can see there are still a few questions we've not covered off. I've got this section here on how to influence analysts. I want to go through this quite quickly, actually, because I can see that there are some really interesting questions. Before I go into this, though, I just want to say, somebody said that they tried to get the report and it wouldn't come up for some reason. I would have hoped that the QR code would work on the earlier graphic, but if not, you can just go to ccgrouppr.com. In the menu, there's a way that you can get into our insights and to see our insights reports. If you go into that section for insights reports, there you will find the report on cybersecurity marketing and the report on analysts and cybersecurity. If you register there, then you will get an email with a link that you can use to download the report. And if I'm thoughtful, then I will also make sure that the email that comes out with the recording also has a link to these 2 reports. Really, really useful. Let me just go through some one slide, really, just on analyst relations. we speak an awful lot with organizations in the cybersecurity space that maybe have got some awareness with industry analysts, but don't know where to begin. And this is the diagram that I use with them. I'd say roughly half of the companies that we work with each year have actually had no mentions by industry analysts. And industry analysts have got such little awareness of them as a firm that they have just not mentioned them yet. And the key thing to do, I think, is to prioritize analysts according to your particular goal. You know, there are different things that different organizations want. The people who will generate awareness for you, the people who write about you relatively soon, you know, that might not be Gartner, even if Gartner is the most influential firm. But on the other hand, if you're on the short list, you want to pull deals in your direction, maybe that's where Gartner comes in. So there's no one priority of analysts. There's no one single cybersecurity magic list of analysts. You have to prioritize people according to your goals. And cybersecurity is such a fast-moving area that the problem that we have with aligning the story, basically with messaging and positioning yourself, is that analyst firms are talking about very early markets, and often they don't have consistent language. Like as a marketer, when you're trying to align to your market, you know, you generally, when customers are buying something, they describe it with fairly similar words. But analysts actually might use very different words, very different terms to describe similar things in markets. And what we found very effective is what we call alignment, basically shifting the way you message about your solutions so that you're speaking to an analyst in her language, aligning to their taxonomy so that it's as easy as possible for them to understand what you do. Engagement is a large part of our work at CCgroup, not just one-to-one organizing briefings and inquiries, but doing all of the one-to-many communication that is needed to raise profile of you. Evaluation is super important because it's very hard for you to maintain the commitment to communicating with analysts and investing in analysts' services unless you're able to show measurably what the impact is on your business. Analyst relations is very hard to measure, but any measurement is better than no measurement. And for most of our clients, we're developing 5 or 6 different metrics for each analyst relations program to give perspective over what's happening, but then also to be able to spotlight the particular metrics that align most with the goals that have been used to prioritize them. And then the final part of our analyst relations progress is leverage. You know, ideally, when you're building relationships with analysts, they are saying nice things about you or saying horrible things about the severity of the problem you're trying to fix. But left to their own devices, those words don't go further than the analyst's immediate organic base. A large part of what we're able to do together with our marketing services team is take that analyst insight and amplify it above its normal, natural levels, and not just to accept the background noise of an analyst, but to expand their audience and to drive more awareness and interest in your solution by leveraging what the analysts have written. So that's our approach to analyst relations, and something that we would recommend, that we have successfully recommended to a whole pile of cybersecurity vendors, and it's made a massive difference for them. In most of the vendors that we work with, if they have had profile with analysts, they at least double that profile within the first year of working with us. I want to, after that little bit of an advert, I want to come back to some of the questions, because I do think some of the questions are really intriguing, and many of them are answered in the report. One of the questions, in fact, 2 of the questions are about: is there a difference in size? Florie, again, you probably don't have the data tables in front of you, but presumably there will have been a difference, won't there, between what the larger organizations said and what the smaller organizations said, because you didn't have any small organizations in your sample, you had like mid-sized ones and large ones, and presumably there will have been some differences, but maybe not as big as the differences between countries.
Yeah, I mean, we are actually looking at doing additional data cuts, but right now, basically, the data cut that we have for the size of organization is basically 100 employees to 2,000 and then 2,000 and plus. So we're still looking at sort of enterprises and then large enterprises, but we can see some differences, yes, in some of the findings. I think one of them, and I was looking at that while you were speaking, Duncan, is when we look at how much of an influence, the type of content have basically on the selection, for example, of a tech supplier, security tech supplier. I think there's about 10% difference there. So I think 83% of companies with less than 2,000 employees said that industry analyst reports have a big influence, and then 73% of the larger companies said they have an influence. So I think there's some differences. It's not like major differences, but sometimes I think it's about sort of like 5-10%. We also see differences, I think, in the different analyst firms that I think companies are talking to. I think that the larger ones tend to speak to Gartner and Forrester, I think, a lot more than they would with like other analyst firms.
And keep in mind, as we were talking about the distribution of Gartner's clients, for instance, they only have 15,700 customers. So worldwide, out of the, there's 84,000 public companies. There's obviously millions of organizations with thousands of employees each. And, Gartner is very thinly penetrated. They just have big companies pretty much. There's some small schools and stuff that do, and government agencies, but for the most part, very, very large organizations have a Gartner relationship.
And I wonder if this is why analyst reports can penetrate so much more deeply than analyst inquiry.
Yeah.
I remember once. I remember when I started to look at Gartner content. Initially, it seemed like very hard to get hold of Gartner Magic Quadrants, but actually, it's actually very hard to find a Gartner Magic Quadrant you can't find for free online.
Right.
And there's so much of that content is now. I mean, it's very lightly gated, by a registration form to a vendor.
Right.
Somebody actually asked about blogs. Maybe one of the reasons why blogs are so popular is that perhaps because they are ungated content, whereas many vendor white papers, licensed analyst reports from analyst firms, these often will be gated, and perhaps that's an important thing. Also, with the peer insights, we're at the stage where peer review, like even Gartner's peer reviews, are now more read than its research.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Which gives a huge, which really shows the value of freemium, and gives a sense of how
Sure.
how powerful. Florie mentioned HFS, which I guess was one of the first really successful freemium firms. Their readerships are massive because of that. And mentioning Deloitte, I used to work at Deloitte, and I know like Deloitte was one of the first organizations to really get into mechanical strategic content marketing in the 20th century. This was a huge part of its success. Every organization needs an auditor, right? So how are you going to work? You start at the top of the list and work your way down. So I think that's a big part of the success there. Are there other reasons why blogs might have been higher up, do we think?
I think the voice of a blog is just easier to consume. White paper has gone through editors, and the voice of the author has been removed. I know as I was getting ready to leave Gartner, I created one of the first blogs in the security world after Richard Balick. He gets credit, I think, for being the first. And it was just, I would get the highest number of downloads I ever got from Magic Quadrant at Gartner was 700. And, my blog posts would regularly get 30,000 views.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Totally.
it was just, and, so frustrating. And that's the reason I had to leave Gartner is their editorial policies removed your voice, right? They wanted the same voice for all reports. And that's no fun to a writer to not have your voice come through. So So I think that appeals to people. They like the voice of individual authors, whether they're officially analysts or just writing and blogging as analysts.
Yeah, they tend to be more opinionated, and I think one of our listener, actually Kaylee, is making a good point. She's saying in the chat that maybe it's also because like white papers and so on are gated, blogs are not, and that's why like you say, it's easily accessible, right? You don't have to also give your details in exchange.
Right.
And also, if you think about many of the freemium analyst firms that have risen, many of them are opinionated. I mean, if you read research from, goodness me, you think that the Gartner report, the Gartner research is flat, but wait till you read IDC, right? So a lot of research is in an extremely flat tone of voice, and coming in and analyst firms that are able to be a bit sharper, as many of the freemium firms are, like the Constellation Research, More Insights, 451 Research, HFS, definitely. I mean, these are organizations which can be Canalys. These are organizations which can be like a little edgy, definitely opinionated. They aren't so carefully balanced the way that Gartner has to be. In fact, even if you think of an organization where Gartner has published a negative vendor rating, it's still quite measured in its words, even when it speaks about an organization that it thinks is failing. Florie, there's a question from Hans about influence on decision making, which is how influential are partners as a channel for decision making? Obviously, partners can mean many things, but particularly, I guess, systems integrators, resellers, distributors. I mean, I know one of my clients is Westcon, for example. So they operate as an intermediary between many cybersecurity vendors and many resellers of cybersecurity solutions. And it seems to me that resellers, channel partners, often have very deep, sticky relationships. I don't know if you asked about channel partners in this year's survey.
No, sadly we didn't. But actually, we're about, I think, to do research where we're going to be surveying channel partners and system integrators, and so we should have, I think, a bit more data on that coming up. I think the closest that we got to, I think, in this research was to be asking about peers, really. So I don't think that that's going to be, I think, interesting for you, if we give you that data.
Absolutely.
And partners cross the spectrum, right? And especially even geographically. So in Europe and Asia, the integrators and distributors and resellers pretty much just choose the best product and deploy it to their customers, right? The customers totally trust that they're going to get what they need from the partner. The partner goes out, finds it, and buys it and deploys it. In the US, totally opposite. The partners are just inking deals, right? Taking leads from the vendors and closing them so that they have a channel. But for the most part, partners are a fantastic influence, right? And I would say much stronger than what the analyst has, right? It's people are already buying from them, already have the relationship, and ask them, what should we use? And then they get it.
Yeah, and I think, if I look at the different clients that I've been working with over the last few years, I think a lot of them have moved towards like a more sort of channel centric, I think, sales model. Rather than direct, I think. So that's interesting to see how that's changing.
Though keep in mind, I always push back on all the vendors that say they're 100% channel. Then all you have to do is look at their LinkedIn employees, and you go, well, what are all these? Why do you have a CRO, a VP of sales, a regional salesperson? Because the channel, especially in the US, is so lazy they need those people to develop the actual customers and pass them off to the channel.
Yeah, totally. No, I think the channel is an amazing thing, and especially when you get into international markets.
Yes.
I remember being at a meeting with the guy who runs Emerson for Latin America, and he was explaining that their lead reseller for El Salvador joined them in 1912. Yeah. So they've been selling through the same lead channel partner in one country for more than 100 years, right? So you just have an idea of like how deep some of these channel partner relationships can be in some markets. I mean, quite phenomenal. And trying to sell around an established channel is very hard. You really have to work with the channel.
Yeah.
We're up against the hour. We weren't able to get into every question. I'm afraid, but we will send out the recording. We'll send out a download link to the report as well. Richard, we'll send out a link to your new book as well when that comes out.
Oh, wonderful! Thank you,
Florie. Thank you so much. I know there's a huge amount of data in this study. I know how hard it was to condense it down to the report, and even harder to condense it down to a fraction of this webinar. So I really appreciate your effort in bringing your story to the attendees.
My pleasure. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for all of your questions. And don't hesitate to contact us if you want the report. Our website is down at the moment. I'm sorry about that, but it should be back online in the next 15 minutes or so.
Fantastic. Well, that's very good to know. Thank you so much, everyone, and we hope to speak to you soon.
Thanks, Duncan.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.